So welcome to another episode of Successfully Live. I'm Adam O'Donnell, the co-founder of Successfully. Today, I'm super excited to be here with Nils Vinje. Nils, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Adam. Great to be here.
Definitely. We're going to have a good time. Nils, so he's currently the VP of Customer Success at Rainforest QA. He's also the founder of Glide Consulting. And my favorite thing about you is that you were the #1 rated speaker at Pulse 2017, and there were a lot of speakers.
No, there were a lot of speakers. That was definitely a highlight for me. I had an absolute blast talking to the couple thousand people for about 45 minutes or an hour and was astonished by the responses. It was just wonderful.
It was cool, man. And that counts like anything that Nick Meta even said, right? Or Dan Simon, like that's all of them.
Right. Yeah. Nick included. Nick was #2 on the list. And then, or no, actually, I think it was Aaron Levy was #2 and Nick was #3. And to beat those two guys on reviews, I was literally blown away. But we had a blast.
I love it. Well, that is so cool. I'm excited to have you here today. This is gonna be a lot of fun. And I mean, basically, we've talked, with Successfully Live, we've covered a lot of different topics, of course. But the interesting thing that I wanted to talk with Nils about was just the operation guide that he's developed at Rainforest QA. And I'm gonna, before you even ask what that is, I'm just gonna let him just dive into what that really is, because it's pretty neat from what we found and unique.
You know, one of the first things I did when I joined Rainforest, with an existing CS team, existing set of processes, existing client base, one of the first things I did was create a single source of truth for how the organization functions, right? So a documented single place of how we run our onboardings, how we run our life cycle, how we handle escalations, how we do everything from the most minute detail of how do I update my customer success platform tool that I use to, how do I engage executives in a situation where I need help as a CSM, right? So this all was essentially tribal knowledge before, or a vast majority of it, at least 80% of it was tribal knowledge before. And the challenge with tribal knowledge is it's not scalable, right? So I bring in one new CSM and it might take them 6 months to learn all these little nuances because they only are going to pick them up over time when they run into this situation. So when creating this single source of truth with a set of docs that just maps out the entire process, this literally was at an operational level how the customer success organization functions. That was the ultimate, starting point for this future operations guide, which we're going to get into here.
So how did this really translate into the actual operational guide that you're using, with your team?
There's a lot of tribal knowledge in our customer base with respect to how our software product is used, right? And this is no different from the tribal knowledge that existed inside of my CS organization when I joined. And the way I got rid of it was by documenting it and creating this operating guide. Right. So we took the same principle and said, all right, if our customers have a high level of tribal knowledge and there's 1 or 2 or 3 people that kind of know how it works and all the ins and outs and what it's supposed to do, the value, the ROI, etc., we need to create some form of guide that will help us document that of how our tool operates inside of their organization. And that was the genesis of the Rainforest QA operations guide, which we use with our customers today.
Got it. So, I mean, I'm going to first just push back. Like, we're all crazy busy. We don't have time for another additional thing. And I know you talked about that at Pulse even, but like, how do we really prioritize this? It obviously has to come from the VP of CS, but I just want to push back. Like, why do you have to do this? Like, as opposed to all the other things that could be taking up our time.
There are 1,000,001 things always that take up our time in CS, right? But if you look at if you address just the things that come up, the quote unquote fires, right? You will forever fight fires. If you address the root cause of them, then you have a much greater chance of painting a much brighter future for yourself down the line. So the perceived amount of effort it takes to do this is extreme and significant. The actual amount of effort it takes to do this is relatively small, right? It takes a concerted, focused effort in as little as a day or two. You already know what all the content is. It just lives in your head or in your CSM's head and your whole team's head. All you have to do is pull it out and organize it and structure it and create something that can be replicated and used with clients to form this guide, right? And I'll get into the specifics of the guide in a little bit, but the again, the perceived amount of time that it takes to do any sort of documentation is always greater than the actual effort that it really takes. And every single person, when they go through an exercise where they document something and get it nailed down and have it solidified, is always 100% satisfied that they spent the time and very thankful and got a higher ROI out of that time. So just because it's another thing on the list and another, thing to do or whatnot, I don't buy it, right? It is more important to spend 30 minutes documenting something you do than to repeat it, whatever you did, 20 times to a customer and waste potentially hours and hours and hours of your time.
How is this not just playbooks? Like what? So obviously it's more than just like the plays you're doing with your customer. Like give us like kind of a variety of like, is it literally just everything that our team does?
With our customers, what we found were that there were certain cases where individuals were responsible for Rainforest inside of an organization, and they frankly didn't have anyone else who knew what was really going on and how it really operated and what was really required to be run on a daily basis. We are a QA and testing solution, right? So there's a specific set of procedures that go along with testing, and there's a specific set of procedures that go along with testing with Rainforest. So one of our CSMs was out having some drinks with a customer, and the customer had to step away for 10 minutes, came back, made a phone call, came back, and said, sorry, apologize about that. I had to call somebody in my office and tell them what they needed to kick off in Rainforest. Kind of ironic since they were having drinks with Rainforest and they had to leave to tell the person what to do. And this was a giant slap in the face that this absolutely should not be the case, because that same person then conceptually could never go on vacation, has a very high bus factor, right? If they went down, got sick for a few weeks, what happens, right? So this is not only a guide of how Rainforest works within the organization, it's also how to run Rainforest within the organization, specific to that organization. So for example, we have, a series of phases that our clients go through from post-onboarding, even all the way from the beginning, right? The onboarding, post-onboarding, we have 3, 4, 5 phases, very specific tasks and things that are in there. All of that is listed in there, of course, because that's the giant map, and we want them to be as familiar with it as we are, and that's what we're taking them through in our annual life cycle. It's part of our discussions around QBRs, our progress, etc. But we also include, details around for their specific testing scenario. How are the tests written inside of Rainforest? How often are they run? What parts of their application do those tests cover? So these are all the little nuances that only the people working with the application would actually know. And that's where we got stuck a number of times, was that somebody knew how to use Rainforest, then they either left or let go or had a change in position. And suddenly nobody knew how to use Rainforest. And everybody said, what are we doing with the Rainforest? Like, I don't know. And then we were fighting an uphill battle to go resell an account. Every single person in CS has been in this situation. It stinks. I hate it, right? So this eliminating of tribal knowledge, which is one person or a small one or two know how to use your application inside the customer, was eliminated by working jointly with them to define this operating guide for Rainforest inside their organization. So it's not playbooks. It doesn't have anything about, what to do here and there. It is an exact replica of here's what Rainforest does. This is how it works inside of our organization. This is the coverage that we get as a result of using Rainforest. And we even have a reporting section, which is very light today, and in the future will be covered by some reporting advancements in our product. But to help capture and start the discussion around the ROI, as we have various different ways we quantify ROI, depending on the organizations. For some people, it's the number of bugs that are caught. For some people, it's the number of hours saved by having our testers execute these tests as opposed to internal people at their organization testing. So it literally is a map, and the actual artifact of this is a shared Google spreadsheet. That's it. This is not complicated. It is not, onerous. It is a spreadsheet with separate tabs, where one tab has the overall life cycle, as I told you, written out. And then the other tabs have our coverage and have our run times and our processes and our reporting and even our internal org structure. We have a page for that to help everybody know who is involved in the Rainforest project at our client site. So when an executive sponsor changes, when a project manager changes, when an individual contributor, tester changes, or somebody new comes into the account, how many times have you heard, hey, have a new person on, can you get them up to speed on what we've done, right? And it's a giant waste of a CSM's time, because no, they should not do that. The organization itself should have this in place, but 9.9 out of 10 times they don't, right? It's because nobody wants to spend time documenting what they do, right? So we did the hard work of doing that upfront piece and said, hey, here's a starting point. It's not an end all be all, but here's the starting point. Let's build this together. And then when you, QA leader, or whoever owns this or is responsible for it, takes that to your management and leadership and says, look, this is how testing with Rainforest and testing overall runs inside our organization, and they see very clear documented cases of exactly what's going on, that is an immediate up-leveling of skill and perception of performance. I guarantee it every single time.
So are you saying that each CSM, it's like, hey, go spend 2 hours today writing down everything you do? Or like, could you help us understand like how you're actually getting your team to do this and the execution of it?
First up was the creation of this, which the entire team had a hand in, right? And our goal was just having a more clear and accurate picture of where customers were in the lifecycle, having them, customers, know a more clear, accurate picture of where they were in our lifecycle, and coming up with a way to remove the tribal knowledge, right? That was the ultimate goal. So the team came together. We built the framework for this, right? And based off of our documentation internally. And then we said, okay, let's test this out with a handful of customers, right? So we took some people who were brand new and in the onboarding phase, and we tested it out, got some feedback that maybe it was too much and a little overwhelming for them because they were still just trying to learn the platform. So we decided to push it backwards a little bit closer to the time at which they transition out of onboarding. But then the people who were later in the life cycle, like from onboarding and on, found tremendous value out of it. One of them even said, quote, I feel like I can finally take a vacation, right? So this is intended to be a jointly owned spreadsheet between the two parties, the CSM and the customer, right? It can be used to set goals. It can be used to track goals. It is the undercurrent that lies everything that happens in between our QBRs, right? And it's referenced during our QBRs. So yeah, so when we rolled it out, we tested it out and we didn't know what was going to happen. We knew this was a value add from our work internally and what happens every time you clearly document something and have a structured place for it, which is always a positive outcome. And we had a very high probability that the people that we worked with primarily that were the owners of Rainforest would find value in this because we did the hard work of what they would not sit down and spend 4 or 5 hours trying to think through and figure out. We said, we're the experts in QA. We need to show our expertise. And if we were responsible for running QA inside of your organization, this is exactly what we would do. That was the mentality. That was the replica. And every CSM in every product in all of SaaS, right, should absolutely be the expert of their product, and their company should hopefully be the experts in their industry, right? They're the only ones who spend 24/7, 365 thinking about it, so they should be the experts. So put yourself in their shoes. What if you were responsible for running your product inside of their organizations? How would you do it? What would you want to have defined? What would you want involved? Right? That was at the essence of this. And we said, if I put myself inside of an organization or one of my clients and said, I have to run QA, this would be stop number one, which is the single source of truth of how everything functions with regards to testing and QA.
Did you ever feel like we spent all this time putting it on there and then it's still not being utilized because it's maybe not easy enough for them or whatever else?
We've iterated a few times. We had pushback from a few customers who said, this is too much still, right? Even though we did the heavy lifting, they still felt it was too much. We said, okay, and what we did internally was take a step back and say, well, okay, if we know the end goal is right, what is it that we need to do in order to make sure that this that the implementation or delivery of this is correct? So we've tweaked the messaging many times. Because it's brand new, we came up with some messaging around how to use it and different messaging for whether or not we were dealing with an executive sponsor, a project manager or director, or an individual contributor tester. Like there's different value props for this operations guide for each of those. And we spent a little bit of time before rolling it out thinking through that process, right? And then we got feedback that, some people still thought it was onerous or too much. So in that case, the directive to the CSM was great. That's an excellent response to dig into. So one of our clients said, you know what, tracking the bugs or tracking the reporting in here, it just doesn't make any sense. And what we were trying to do is like figure out how they measured ROI. So tracking, is it bugs? Is it time saves? Is it whatever? And we said, and it said, well, the follow-up question then, if that's too onerous, is how do you do this today? And the reality was they don't. I said, well, how do you measure QA and how do you measure testing and how do you measure these things? And there were a lot of blank stares. So even when there was pushback that this was too much and took too much effort, all it was an opening of another conversation to dig a level deeper and understand what's really on their mind. Because I know, and my CSMs know, that every single person has a personal set of objectives and a professional set of objectives that they're working for all the time, no matter what, right? And it's our job to understand how we can deliver value from our product to support that person or that group with their objectives. So if they don't have any value in reporting, there's got to be a reason why. Is reporting and stuff just not done inside the organization? Or is it that type of reporting and those metrics are not relevant to this individual and what they're bonused on and comped on and what their next promotion is based on? Right? So those, it was great pushback, which was awesome. And then it just gives us an opportunity to dive deeper. So the CSMs, have these tools with them, and we keep iterating and coming up with new pieces every time we get a new bit of feedback back. But they ultimately are trying to understand the customer at a deeper level, and this is one method to do that.
Just could you give me a 1-minute version of how you would pitch this to the CEO of Rainforest as to why you're spending this time doing it?
The Rainforest QA Operations Guide exists to remove the tribal knowledge of how QA functions within your organization, right? It is a blueprint of what we have done to date, what we plan to do, how tests are run, how much coverage you have, and how many bugs and issues and time saved we've provided. So it is the clearest picture in one place of all of Rainforest and what it has delivered in terms of ROI coverage for your particular product.
I know that's true. And I just talking with you, I know that you push hard on holding the line on those things, because it all happens on the margin where you start to lose that accountability, and it's like, no, we have to do this, and everything kind of works out from there. Once again, it's the most basic concept, but it makes so much sense.
And my role as leader of the CS organization is to understand, one, where the big holes are, and this was a big hole, right? It's about seeing patterns. We saw these things, we saw behaviors from customers, we heard stories of like the person at Drinks who had to leave and tell somebody else how to run Rainforest, like should never happen, right? Those are patterns and all those things we put together and said, there has to be a way to fill this, and then to figure out, okay, high level, how do we fill this? Well, if I was in their shoes, what would I do? I would fill it the same way I filled it here, right? But the real key is the accountability, right? So the team has been tasked with taking this to customers. This is not something that I just said, oh, hey, roll out and go do this and don't revisit, right? This is all about accountability, right? And this is going to make CSM's lives easier over time. Every single thing I introduced to them and that we agreed to do as a team as a whole is designed to make their lives easier, make our relationships with our customers stronger, and deliver a higher value to our customers. And they know that, and they trust me to do that, right? Because I wouldn't introduce anything that didn't align with those principles. So my job now is like, I don't get into the weeds, and I'm not down there building these individual operations guides, right? But I absolutely am holding them accountable to make sure that they are rolled out to their respective customers and that they are not just a one-time thing, right? That they continuously use, continuously update, continuously edit. And this is part of being just driving accountability through your entire team, that if you set up a major initiative like this, where something's going to affect every single customer, this is not a one and done thing, right? It'll take us 6 to 12 months to get this rolled out to every single customer, and that's okay. But it is not going away, right? We know that it has tremendous value, and we will iterate on it as it comes. But my directive is to push and get this thing into more and more and more customers all the time. And that is a core part of my account reviews, core part of the discussions with my CSMs, core part of, just the team as a whole and how we operate and how we think is, again, put ourselves in their shoes. What would we need to run QA inside their organization? That's what we have to deliver.
This has been incredible. Thank you so much for your time. Another great episode of Successfully Live.